Detective McPherson, Dana Andrews. Dana was already a top-billed actor with films such as The Oxbow Incident, The Purple Heart, but Laura made Dana Andrews a star, no doubt about it. Andrews journeyed a really hard road to become one of Hollywood's best and favorite actors, and I am delighted that we have in the house today as our special guest Susan Andrews, who's traveled from her home in the Bay Area to discuss her father's career and legacy with us on Mother's Day. And Susan will be on stage with me after that. You'll find, I think she's an objective and articulate spokesman about not only her father, but about growing up in Hollywood. So please give Susan a warm Palm Springs welcome. Thank you. Did your dad ever share anything with you or your brothers and sisters about this movie, Laura?
Not in detail.
No,
not in detail. It was sort of an icon in the house. I mean, we all knew Laura. And,
right.
he talked about Otto Preminger.
Yeah.
And I always knew about Laura, but he didn't talk about his movies a lot.
Yeah. It was interesting. Your dad did a detailed interview with Rudy Belmer, a great film historian who's a friend of mine. And Mamoulian very much was shooting this as a traditional murder mystery, and your dad was just playing kind of a hard-boiled cop. And Otto was really the guy when he came in and he gave your dad the falling in love and the kind of obsessive compulsive, if you will, with the picture and all of that, and added. And your dad related a story where Mamoulian was still the nominal director, and he and Otto were really fighting over the content and the theme of the picture. And your dad was in this meeting with Mamoulian, Otto, and Daryl Zanuck, like King Solomon, sitting behind his desk, sharpening the sword and deciding who was going to get cut in half. And then your dad, he said, I got to a certain point where I knew I didn't need to be there. And he said, I excused myself and left, and the next day Otto showed up on the set and was directing the picture. And that was that. But Otto was not someone that people warmed up to on a movie set, to put it mildly. And your dad said at the time he made everybody very, very uncomfortable. But I guess after a while your dad came, he did Fallen Angel and Where the Sidewalk Ends. They developed a good working relationship between your dad and Otto. Is that
yes,
yeah.
In fact, I read somewhere that he was one of the few people that could actually talk back to Otto.
Yeah, you did have to stand up to Otto or it was over.
Yeah. I also think that my father responded well to a good director.
Yes, and Otto was certainly a good director.
And he worked with some of the very best.
He did. And your dad really, we talked last night about Burt Lancaster, and I know you got to watch that. And Burt, he's in one play, he gets signed, he makes The Killers, and his name was above the title for the rest of his career. But your dad traveled the hard road. I mean, he had to pay his dues, and his upbringing in Texas, the son of a preacher. Talk a little bit about your dad's upbringing and how that shaped him in his career.
Well, his beloved mother had 13 children. 9
Wow.
of them lived to adulthood. In those days, without penicillin, you get pneumonia and you're gone. And he adored his mother, and the father was not a nice man, but he was a very powerful man, and he was a preacher, so they would move from parish to parish. But he was an Elmer Gantry kind of a figure.
Right, fire and brimstone.
He was an actor. He was a powerful guy, and everyone admired him. And he was an educated man, and he was a smart guy. And I think the boys relied on each other a lot. I think it was hard scrabble life that they lived.
Sure.
And this mother raised them. And the father was just this guy that was very tough and very, I'm sure he was charismatic.
Sure.
The charisma probably. He told my father there was 2 things that he must always stay away from: alcohol and movies.
Well, that didn't work. Yeah, and your father, in reading about him, I guess he worked very hard. He had a thick Texas accent.
Yeah, which he could go back to very easily when he was talking to his brothers on the
Oh,
phone.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
But you talk about how it wasn't overnight. He came
No,
to
right.
Hollywood in the 30s, worked at a gas station. He took opera lessons, we know a lot because we have his journal, so he wrote everything down at that time.
Right.
And he thought, well, maybe I should be a writer, and he would write things in the journal.
Yeah.
Or maybe I should be an opera singer.
Yeah.
And he worked very hard at both of those things.
Yeah,
And then
I don't think, just to interject, I don't think a lot of people know that your dad had this excellent, wonderful singing voice,
Yeah.
rich baritone.
Anybody that spent much time at our house did hear that.
Yeah,
Songs.
that's terrific. Yeah.
But he then went to Pasadena Playhouse,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like a long time before he got a screen test.
Right.
And so it wasn't overnight. And
Mhm.
he was a very highly trained actor. By the time he first got to movies, he'd already been on stage for years and
Mhm.
singing.
Really?
So it wasn't an overnight success. I think it usually isn't.
No, it's not.
It usually
It's not.
isn't. I think
It's
Burt
not.
Lancaster was a real exception in that
Absolutely.
regard.
And your dad, he seems so polished.
Yeah.
And, you know, the one scene where he comes in the apartment and you can see him brooding, and then the drinking, and he goes and he looks in his drawer, and it's just, and you can follow his line of thought, and there's no dialogue, there doesn't need to be any dialogue. He's really conveying the kind of angst and the confliction he's feeling about getting involved with this picture and in this woman's life and getting emotionally connected, and you can tell it's happening to him, but he's kind of uncomfortable about it as well. It's just a phenomenal performance. Did your parents consciously try to keep you away from all the Hollywood stuff and
They
bring you
did.
up quote unquote normal? Talk
Yeah,
about
we
that a little
didn't.
bit.
They didn't want to live in Beverly Hills. We grew up in the valley in Toluca Lake. Although, as I said to Alan, well, we did have Bob Hope next door, so it wasn't completely.
That is a little different.
I hear now that Toluca Lake is where all the celebrities live. But at the time, that wasn't the case, and they always said they didn't want us to go into the business. But
Right.
my brother and I both flirted with that for a while.
Sure.
And they tried to keep us out of the limelight. Not that easy, but they tried.
Mhm.
And their friends, they didn't have movie star friends. They had
Yeah.
actor friends and director friends. You
Yeah.
mentioned that. He was best
Right.
friends with Millie Milestone and Jacques Tourneur
Yeah.
and others, Mark
Yeah.
Robeson.
Right, right. Well, Millie Milestone, one of the things your dad told Rudy was that as Otto was looking for the director of this film, one of the people that passed on it was Millie Milestone, and he had the script, and he was with your dad, I guess, riding home, and he actually gave the script to your dad and said, "This isn't for me, but you know, if you play this may make you a star."
Well, it did.
Yeah, and it did. So he certainly was fortuitous in doing that. And what do you remember? I mean, did your dad, did you do a lot of outings with him and friends and boats? What was the leisure
Well,
life like?
We were
with him?
happiest when we were on our sailboat with my dad, because he was very, very happy when he was sailing, and he wasn't agitated, and he was in a good mood.
Mhm.
And Jacques Tourneur was often on the sailboat too.
The director of our next picture, by the way, Jacques Tourneur, out of the
And
past.
two of his brothers were on the boat with him usually, often, and his family.
Mhm.
He did bring movie stars out on the boat. My sister famously stepped on Merle Oberon's face. She was lying, sunning herself on the deck. So we heard some stories like that. But by the time I came around, I'm the youngest of
Yeah.
four. And by the time I came around, there wasn't so many movie stars on the boat anymore. But
Right.
but that's where we were really happy. And we spent
On
a
the
lot
boat.
of time at Catalina.
Right.
And there was no 5 down to San Pedro. There was no Marina del Rey.
Sure.
You drove to San Pedro on the
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
My mother grew up in the 30s in Beverly Hills, and she used to go visit her uncle in Northridge, and I said, what was that like? And she said, like driving to China.
Yeah.
You know, it was just really a
Well,
long...
my
yeah.
grandparents lived in Santa Monica. My mother was born and raised in Santa Monica, and we'd drive from the valley to Santa Monica to visit the grandparents
Sure.
every week.
Sure.
And it was over, I guess it was Sepulveda.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Sepulveda, pass. I don't think it's a secret your dad drank
Yeah?
a lot. But what I always found interesting about this is the self-destructiveness of that era of people that drank and people in Hollywood that drank. And I remember we had Norman Lloyd here, I think 3 years ago for Saboteur, and I had lunch with him. And in the course of our conversation, your dad's name came up. I said something about Dana Andrews, A Walk in the Sun. And Norman just softened and got misty-eyed. He said, Dana, I just loved Dana. He was so great. He was such a good person. He said he was a prince of a fellow, which is not an expression you hear very much anymore in 2014. But your dad was so admired and even revered by so many of his colleagues and people that he worked with.
And the people on the set always would say that to us. If we run into people that said, "Oh, I was a grip, whatever."
Yes.
And your father was just such a great guy. So he was on the set. I bet he really was, and he wasn't home too.
Yes.
When he was really drinking, he wasn't necessarily a prince of a guy.
Sure, of course.
But he was the rest of the time.
Yeah,
and
that's wonderful.
he went in and out of his periods of intense alcoholism, and then when he was out, he was fine.